Hello everyone, my name is Jenna Patterson and I am presenting this discussion on Barano and Kiltzman's article, Towards an Integrated Perspective on Bereavement. Some of the key points that were discussed in this article are Freud's concept of the workings of mourning, bereavement perspectives, and grieving processes. Every second of every day, death is happening around the world. People are losing their family and friends, then being left to cope with this tragedy. The pain of this loss can affect everyone in different ways. This paper addressed the grieving processes and perspectives on bereavement and how these perspectives can assist when looking at different kinds and types of loss and bereavement. Freud stated, grieving was primarily a private process. The mourner clings to the lost object so intensely that a turning away from reality arises. But with the passage of time, however, the mourner gradually reviews each single one of these memories and hopes which bond the person to the object, until emotional detachment is accomplished. Rather than engaging in the work of mourning, the bereaved survivor retains an unconscious identification with the lost object and consequently redirects negative feelings about the deceased or the lost inwardly in the form of depressive self-reproach or guilt. Although Freud puts forth these speculations with great caution and was concerned primarily with elucidating his views about depression rather than mourning per se, the metaphor of the work of mourning was readily adopted. The grief work perspective stresses the importance of working through these thoughts and emotions associated with the lost relationship, with particular emphasis on negative material and on relinquishing the attachment bond to the deceased. Yet one article states that the view that everyone needs to do grief work is an oversimplification and has directly contradicted predictions from the grief work perspective. Cognitive stress perspective is a systemic and theoretical coherent framework from which to consider difficult life events and their relationship on psychological and physical health. This perspective is appraised on how one perceives the stress on his or her own health. The article gives a great example of this. A person may experience pain or sadness at the loss of a loved one, but may not necessarily experience the loss of an enduring stressor. The bereaved survivor evaluates and appraises the stress and how it will impact them. There were many studies noted that negative appraisals were less common than positive ones, and they were associated with increased grief. Coping mechanisms to deal with this traumatic event can cause some distress, such as self-blame, optimism, or lead to people looking for support in various environments. The attachment perspective states, grief over the death of a close friend or relationship is part of a natural repertoire of behavioral responses that evolved to foster proximity with and minimize separation from the object of attachment. The social functional approach to emotion explains emotion as interpersonal functioning, such as anger and flight responses, and is rapid to interpersonal functioning as emotions communicate and evoke responses in others that help maintain the social order and intimate relationships. Ongoing expressions of negative emotions such as anger can lead to damage, interpersonal relationships and social supports, and sadness can be associated with rejection and withdrawal. The trauma perspective is a loss that resulted from a violent death, and survivors can display reactions similar to post-traumatic stress disorder. This perspective provides emphasis on the types of loss that can occur and the impact they can have. When a traumatic death occurs, one study found that depression remains elevated for over 25 months, and also that the development of traumatic reactions occur with violent deaths. This article considers bereavement in 4 primary components: the context of the loss, the continuum of subjective meanings associated with the loss, the changing representation of the lost relationship over time, and the role of coping and emotional regulational processes. The context of the loss is important so we understand how the loss occurs which includes age, gender, income level, type, expectedness of the loss, and previous experiences with loss or depression, and perceived social support. The continuum of subjective meaning looks at the meaning of their loss in the context of their ongoing current lives, so things like changes in level of income because of death of a spouse can impact their current lifestyle and places they are in at present. Changing representation of the lost relationship addresses the development of meaning after development of meaning after a loss over time. Coping and emotional regulations look at health and well-being. Everyone goes through the grieving process with the loss of a loved one, but when looking at it through different perspectives, it can shed light onto how someone might be coping and how their individual bereavement is going. There is no right or wrong answer, but the research shows strong trends with grief and emotional stages that one goes through, and by combining these perspectives of bereavement can allow an integrative lens on dealing with the loss of a loved one. I have a couple questions to pose to the class. My first question is, 71% of widowers during the first 2 months of bereavement felt that their deceased spouse was still with them sometimes. 61% felt that their deceased spouse were watching out for them, and 39% stated that they still talked with their deceased spouse regularly. When looking at these statistics, do you believe that ambivalence is healthy in buffering the survivor from the pain of the loss? The second question that I have for the class is, do you believe that the death of a loved one could be alleviating instead of an enduring stressor for a spouse of a resident in long-term care with dementia? As a cognitive stress perspective gives an example, a person may experience pain or sadness at the loss of a loved one, but may not necessarily experience the loss of an enduring stressor. What's everybody's take on that?